Welcome everyone to today's presentation on how business architecture delivers strategic alignment for next generation enterprise architects. I'm Chris Vasilati. I'm VP of Sales and Marketing for Fios Insight, and we're happy to have the opportunity to speak with you all today about business architecture. In today's session, we're going to be covering a high-level overview of business architecture, discussing definitions, needs, challenges, and benefits. We'll also be presenting a case study on how business architecture helped drive alignment for an oil and gas company's application rationalization efforts. And at the end of the presentation, hopefully you'll stick around, Fios Insight will be making a special offer to AEA members to get access to Insight EA, which is our new SaaS enterprise architecture solution. So hopefully you can stick around for that. And we'll also be taking questions at the end via the Q&A panel, as previously mentioned. Please try to put them in the Q&A panel as opposed to the chat panel. If we don't have time to answer questions, we will take those offline and post answers via the AEA after the event. Today's presenters are Vernon Smith. Vernon is the CEO and founder of Fios Insight, and Santana Mariscal, who is an enterprise architect. Santana will introduce himself as we introduce the case study, but at this point, I'll hand the presentation over to Vernon Smith to introduce himself and kick off the presentation. Vernon?
Hi, thanks very much, Chris. Hoping everybody can hear me all right. Can somebody who has some volume acknowledge that, please? Can somebody hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. It's always good to check these things to start off with. Okay, I don't really want to leave that picture on the screen any more than I have to, either mine or Santana's, to be honest, so I'm going to just click that straight through. Okay, so I'm assuming that most people on the call are familiar with business architecture as a concept. Unfortunately, there are lots of different definitions of the concept. You can see on the screen here, I'm not going to read through them all word for word, but you can see them. Gartner look at it very strategically. They look at it from a fairly high level. BizBox defines things in a very detailed way by the Business Architecture Guild. The OMG have had their definition for some time. Whichever view you subscribe to, there are common principles which I think we'll all agree with. I'm not sure about all of you guys, but I'm still fairly regularly faced whenever I go out to do a business architecture engagement. I'm faced with people who start off saying, yeah, I think we sort of understand our processes, and we've even drawn some pictures of some of them. And the reality is, in a lot of organizations, people still think process leads business architecture. And it's clearly there's so much more to it than that. There's a great integration with other elements of enterprise architecture. There's strategic elements to it. It's certainly not just process, and it's probably never been just process. But it's the way that a lot of folks think about it still. So it's just something to bear in mind going through this. We're trying to sort of elevate and broaden people's understanding of business architecture. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, speaking to the converted, whatever analogy you want to use with this audience, but I'm just saying for the rest of the world that's out there, we still have a way to go with really explaining this stuff. Okay, so grabbed a few quotes here from BizBox. I'm not saying BizBox is the only way to do this. It's not the only set of rules out there, but most people tend to gravitate towards it. I mean, BizBox, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's from the Business Architecture Guild. It stands for the Business Architecture Body of Knowledge. It's a fine and weighty tome, and it's extremely useful. Just have a look at each of these principles. The first one says business architecture isn't about it. Sorry, I'm reading the first and second together. Business architecture is about the business. What that really means is it's not only focused on IT execution. If it is, it loses its perspective, it loses its effectiveness. A lot of times out there, we see folks who have, they put in huge time and effort into building EA practices, into doing app-rat exercises like the one we'll see later on today, and they achieve a technical goal, or they're looking for reducing technical debt, or they're looking for more alignment on standards, which is all good and noble. But if in doing that, they completely miss the business strategic goal, it's not really what they should have been doing. It's not prescriptive. you can't say this is what business architecture always looks like. It depends on the size of the organization, depends on the business situation. One of the books on business architecture that I tend to go back to quite a lot is a thing called Business Architecture, a Practical Guide, written by Jonathan Whelan and Graham Meaden, who I've worked with these guys in the past. And one of the points they make in their introduction is that an enterprise does not need to be big to be complex. Enterprises get complex very quickly, and the business view of enterprises gets complex very quickly. The whole point of business architecture, the essence of it, is to standardize and simplify those complexities into a way that they will actually make sense, and you can apply architecture frameworks, you can apply technology approaches, you can apply all sorts of other things to them with a consistent understanding. Third point, it's iterative. It doesn't end. It never ends. Typically what we find is there are two phases to a business architecture engagement with an organization. I used to do a lot of work in banking many years ago, and we used to describe all of our projects and our initiatives as one of two things. They were either change the bank or run the bank. So same thing applies here. When you first take on a business architecture initiative, it's all about setting it up, getting it going, getting understanding, but then it becomes a steady state. It becomes something that should always be living. It should always be a foundation for the rest of the architecture efforts, a foundation for IT change. It's reusable. That sort of falls back into the previous point. It's not a one-time event. It should always be used as what you're building on for decision making. And it's not just about deliverables. It's about a creative process. Some of the finest business architects I've ever met are not technicians, they're not academics, they're musicians, they're photographers, they're artists, they're people who can apply a creative flair to a discipline. You need both sides, you need the discipline, but you need the creative process as well. And it can lose its effectiveness if it's boxed in by specific deliverables. Now, that's not to say there are not certain things that need to be done, because you need to be able to measure business architecture just like you can everything else. But it does need to have that little bit more freedom. A couple of quotes down here. Again, I'm not going to read through them in detail, but there's a quote from Andrew Matheson at Southwest Airlines. I think he makes some great points in there. And Allison's quote, short and sweet. The reason you're doing business architecture is to drive consensus, bring people together, achieve clarity, and solve problems. It's the basis, it's a foundation for everything else that you need to do. Okay, let's look in a little bit more detail at this. How important is business architecture? What does it really matter? So this is a slide that Gartner have been putting around for, this one has been out for just under a year now, but they've been talking this talk for a number of years. Way back, 87, John Zachman introduced his framework for enterprise architecture. DoD, DODAF, TOGAF, MODAF, etc., all were formalizing enterprise architecture. But those of you that worked with TOGAF 8 and even TOGAF 9 into 9.1, remember there was a very skinny portion of business architecture in there, really. It really has started getting more recognition and more traction, I suppose, over the last few years. Obviously, this is a Gartner slide. It's biased towards what Gartner say. They introduced business outcome driven EA in 2011. We were at a Gartner conference, the Gartner's EA Summit earlier in the year. I'm sure some of you were there as well. I think about, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was maybe half of the sessions had a business architecture flavor to them. I've been to a lot of these conferences over probably more years than I'd care to think of. And this is the first time I've seen business architecture really taking, not center stage, but equal stage with the rest of the enterprise architecture disciplines. To me, that's encouraging. To me, that's interesting. It's good to see it growing like that. So it's been growing in importance really since 2011. They now, from Gartner's point of view, certainly, they now see it as critical for client organizations and for enterprise architects. They see the next generation of enterprise architects being hand-in-hand business and technology architects, hand-in-hand business and security, information, data, and business, all coming together. That's their consistent message across all of these things. So it's really about being a business partner and a strategist as well as being a technologist, all of those things. Okay, so we've looked at people thinking it's important. What specifically is important about it? A lot of organizations over the years have and will continue to fail executing their strategy. These first few points made up here, some of these are very scary. 50 to 90% of strategic initiatives are failures. Not sure I've really seen that, but I've certainly seen a number above 50. 70% of organizations unable to execute their strategy. That is certainly true. So often the strategy becomes lost, certainly to what we see on the more IT side of things. The business strategy is often a distant relative to what we're doing, and it shouldn't be, it can't be. So I talked about one of the books that's out there, Graham's book. There's Bill Ulrich's book. There's various others. There's the new quick guide that the Business Architecture Guild have just released. And then there's also this book, Business Architecture, The Missing Link by Pierre and Bernard. This is an interesting book to me. It's a little bit of a different take on things. What these guys did was they dug right back into the literature, they dug right back into the research to probably early 1950s when the corporate strategy revolution happened. The word strategy started coming into the way that companies spoke with some regularity. Now you can't find any company that doesn't talk about their strategy. Obviously, it's intrinsic to the way we do business. But what we find still, a lot of organizations, although they talk about strategy a lot, they can't really attain that strategy. They either define goals that are too lofty and they don't really build the meat underneath them, if you like, for want of a better analogy. They're missing the goal often. So often, organizations are missing the goal. Because if you want to really create and sustain a competitive advantage, organizations have to repeatedly overcome those three difficult challenges. You must formulate a sound strategy, and a sound strategy doesn't just mean one that has achievable business goals. It means one that has a genuine route to get to those goals. It ties together what the technology needs to deliver to meet that, what people need to do, the processes, all those old things that we used to talk about in isolation. All of those have to be well defined in order to formulate a good strategy. Very importantly, they must implement that strategy. So they've got to put their organization in a position where it can transform. So we're differentiating here between implementing and executing. So implementing the strategy is setting themselves up to succeed, setting up, recognizing the importance of enterprise architecture and business architecture as a discipline, recognizing that it's way beyond just controlling IT projects, and it should be part of defining how the organization can measure itself going forward. And then thirdly, they must properly execute their strategy, perform their set of activities exactly as desired, measure them in a repeatable fashion, continue to deliver them. Okay, I'm not going to again read through all of these. I'm sure Santana's going to have much more interesting things to say than I am, and he's got a great case study to share with you, so I don't want to eat into his time too much. We'll make these slides available for everybody. This is just a section out of the Asate book that I was talking about just now. And they talk in there about the challenges, this is breaking down those challenges into 10 common failure points in most strategic transformations and the reasons behind them. This explains where a proper business architecture practice can mitigate these pitfalls. So just have a look over these, see if there's things on here that you or your clients are recognizing. Some of these activities we've talked about. We're not going to go through them all, but it is an interesting perspective. I'd recommend having a look at that book along with the others. There's good knowledge out there. It still needs to be better understood by everyone. It still needs to be more consistent. Okay, so how does this fit into our traditional view of enterprise architecture? This is our take on it. There are others, but this is our take on it, is that business architecture is an equal partner at the table along with information, application, and technology architecture. Sometimes folks will split information into information and data. We've got a security architecture element to it. We've got architectural governance. We've got a whole slew of associations across these things between the elements of the practice areas. If you put all of those things together, business architecture is a very little, if any, value on its own. It has to exist with these other disciplines, but it enhances these other disciplines. It helps them to get relevance. One of the hardest things, certainly if I look back 10, 15 years, earlier days of setting up EA practices and trying to get traction in EA practices, was getting business buy-in, was getting folks to really see the business value of it. I remember working with some other folks in the Architecture Forum, in the Open Group, back in the early days of TOGAF 9, when one of the hardest areas we were trying to define was architecture value realization. How do you really do that? How do you really prove what we do is relevant to the business? Business architecture gives you a bridge for that. Okay, so that's my brief overview of business architecture. I know there are plenty of other views out there. I just wanted to share mine, and hopefully that has been of help to you all. What I'm going to do now is pass over to Mr. Mariscal, who is going to talk to you about business architecture driving application rationalization. All yours, Santana.
Okay, thank you, Vernon. So, thank you, Vernon. Thanks, EAE, for allowing me to share my experience with business architecture. So, first, introduction. So, I do not play the guitar. Some of you may get that reference. I get that a lot, so I just wanted to roll that out. But from a background perspective, I have a management information systems degree and come from a development background, so hands-on coder developer early on in my experience. But as I grew my career, my experience, I realized that I could add more value being more of a translator between the business and technology. So that led me my career path through solution architecture, eventually enterprise architecture, and now getting more into the business architecture side. So I've gone from hands-on, just helping the business through technology, to helping the business align the technology and why we need the right solutions and what we need. So specifically today, I wanted to talk to you about initiative that I just got through completing for a large independent exploration production company headquartered in Houston, Texas. So the company had grown through acquisition. A lot of it, they also experienced rapid organic growth when oil was at $100 a barrel. So these factors led to complex and inefficient application portfolio, and they had no real facts and figures on how the systems and applications align with the business needs and the technical health of those applications. So they had been going really fast, supporting the business, which led to a lot of different applications. So we realized there was a need to take a harder look at our application landscape and how the business was being served by these applications. So our approach was to establish business architecture as that common language and that framework to allow us to assess the application landscape across the organization. And we started with business architecture, specifically business capabilities, and aligning the business capabilities to the applications that support those. I'll go into more details on the previous slides on how we actually did that. From an outcomes perspective, we were able to identify $3.5 million in cost savings, and also helped clean up a lot of applications that were in our CMDB that were no longer needed, no longer supported, and drive a lot of those inefficiencies. I will say, just from a high-level overview, the biggest impact post, besides the dollar savings that we saw from an organization perspective, is that we were able to establish that common language of business architecture and specifically capabilities. We'll talk about information models and the value streams, and how these components became a common language for us to speak with the business and understand their business needs, and also for the business themselves to talk cross-functionally and throughout the organization about their people and how they were organized. So our initial approach was to gather information about our application landscape, and so we had a lot of applications. We wanted to get an inventory of it and gather information as we could. What we found was when we were talking to the stakeholders, they were saying all of their applications were mission critical. All of their applications had high business value, and all of them, not everybody, but the common theme we heard was all of them are important and we need them all. And so what we decided was that we needed business architecture to help us align and build that business context, that common language again, of how business architecture aligns with the software and the applications underneath it. So we, in that step number 2, not only assessing, we've used the capabilities, the information models, and our value streams to categorize our applications and how they service. So that helped us better understand from a business context how these applications serve and where we can make some migrations, where we can retire because we had redundancy, and come up with a rationalized application landscape. So in order to gather all this information, we used Insight's tool for questions and a questionnaire and query. And so we had to capture a lot of information about our applications, and we sent out almost 1,000 questionnaires to our organization. All this information was in the form of a questionnaire/survey. We had a 79% response rate, which was really, really good. And one of the things that we did is we also followed up on on those questionnaires to get some context and also to get some clarifying information on it. We did this fairly quickly. We did this in 3 months, and it was a phased approach where we would send out a group of questionnaires by domain or by functional area, start those follow-ups, and then queue up the next ones. So we were able to do it fast. I would say one of the reasons we were able to gather it in 3 months was we kept all the information in one system, which is Insight, versus sending out a SurveyMonkey or a query or just an Excel spreadsheet that people answered, got back, and then we had to compile that. So that led to us being able to do it quickly and efficiently. As I mentioned earlier, we introduced business capabilities, and we had to do a little bit of education to our people on what a business capability is and what it is not. When we first started talking to the subject matter experts and the users, right away they started to come back with a business process of what a capability is, and so we had to do some education on what it was, and so we started with an industry template of just a base model of exploration and production companies. So we started with that as our seeds, but then we met with the functional experts and the subject matter experts within each group and refined that to make sure that it fit within our organization. So a lot of it was just semantics, where we called something slightly different, and other things were grouping and categorizing. But for the most part, it was mostly there. And what we also found was giving them the opportunity to provide that input gave the business unit ownership into the architecture, and now it made it their own. So, it was their own from each group perspective, and so this exercise helped that again. We found that using 3 levels deep of business capabilities was sufficient for ours, and so depending on how your organization's complexity, you can go 1 or 2 levels deeper if you want to go a little bit deeper, but we were able to keep it to 3 levels deep as far as a hierarchy of how we organize our business capabilities. So with our business capabilities, we built a model inside EA, and we call this our business capability model. So you'll hear me refer to a BCM or a business capability model. And so once we have all the questionnaire information and we got that back, we did ask them through our questionnaires, tell us what business capabilities this application, for example, provides you. So we were able to get that and then create heat maps where in Insight where it would show us, where one capability had a lot of applications supporting it or where there was under-supported applications. And we chose these thresholds. So if you can see the legend, 1 to 4 applications is green, but those are totally adjustable. There were some areas where we found that we wanted to, have less. So we wanted to highlight if it was 3 applications that were supporting it, then that was more important. So it depends on your organization, but the model itself is totally flexible to allow you to refine those thresholds and tell that story. So I mentioned earlier, we also created an information model, which allowed us to also heat map. And similar to the capabilities, we asked our users what information is provided by the applications and align those with that. So we were able to say if a high value business object and information object was supported by multiple applications, we could at that point drill down and see, okay, this information has some redundancy, so we can do some data cleanup. And that was important to help drive our decision models. But as well, in parallel, there was a data governance initiative going on and a master data management initiative going on. And they were, when I talked to the project manager for that group, they were using Excel to track their data lineage. And I showed him our tool, and we were quickly able to import his information that he had already in his Excel and then create some of the models to show him. And it provided a better visual, and it allowed him to easier communicate with his stakeholders on that data lineage and how that data was organized. So we also established value streams, and this again proved we had to do a little bit of education with the business users on what a value stream was. This is another one where they would think of a business process when they thought of a value stream, and we had to educate them on how we wanted to structure our business values and then our business value streams, and then align those with our applications. And that was important because it allowed us to show how, where, not only how, but where in the value stream our applications were used and when they were used. And so here you can see we provided a screenshot of our value stream and also our value stream cross map, which shows the applications underneath it that support it. So another thing that we did, because we gathered a lot of information, we collected all this data from our stakeholders, and we plotted it on a application value graph, and it showed us where we had applications that were how they aligned with the business value and the technical health. The criteria that we used, we selected it carefully to show us our graph. So those are again customizable for your needs. If one area is more important for you from a technical health versus another, you can grade that higher, and it'll adjust the graph. So we went through our business questions and went through our technical health questions, and we chose a subset that would tell us where we need to make some decisions on. So I'll introduce the time here in a second, but obviously if you have a low business value application and a low technical health application, it falls within that lower left-hand quadrant. Those are opportunities for making a change or eliminating or consolidating. So we used, this is a Gartner approach. It's called the time approach. It's tolerate, invest, migrate, and eliminate. It aligned very well with the application value in Insight, and it plotted the applications in these quadrants. And so here's this is where we identified that migrate and that eliminate our applications that we can look at into making some cost efficiencies or some changes to them. So this is a closer look at one of the areas of our business capabilities and the heat map. So one of the things that I liked about being able to heat map our applications to our capabilities is you're just showing this to somebody that may not know this area, one would assume that the capabilities with higher number of applications are probably going to be your more important or your high business value. So I'll take, for example, production forecasting had 9 applications. So you would assume that that's a high business value. Well, that may or may not be the case. So, but it allows you to start digging into those, right? And when we start asking the subject matter experts for that area, they're saying, yes, production forecasting is important, but do we really need 9 applications to do that, or does it really need to be right-sized? And so it starts the conversations. And so the way we took it was business capabilities and the heat maps starts to identify opportunities, and then we take that along with our application value. So we'll look at those 9 applications and how they scored. And so then going to the next one and say, okay, we'll look at the applications within that portfolio and say, okay, we had 9 in production forecasting. Where did they actually land in our 4 quadrants? Did all 9 of them land in invest? Probably not. You'll have that different representation. So taking that into account, you can now build a roadmap to say, okay, let's look at the ones that fell in eliminate. Does that business capability have other applications that can support it? And if so, let's look at moving those into a roadmap where we can eliminate. So now that we have the business capabilities, we have an information model and our technical health and business value, we can determine a roadmap for our portfolio, and we can combine those business drivers and those objectives as well. Put that all into one roadmap and say, okay, if an technical health of an application may be low, then let's look at either migrating to a newer version or moving to another platform. So it drove those conversations, and it also allowed us to make future-looking decisions on that. And so having all that information in one place and quickly accessible versus maybe Excel spreadsheets or other databases will help us tell that story, and then also quickly dig into it when we had some questions about a specific application. We can go in and get all that information quickly and print out reports, which I didn't show in here, but there are some good reports from a one-pager that you can get about your business capabilities and applications. Okay, so we focused on high redundancy. So where we had high redundant business capabilities with a lot of applications and high dollar applications to build our roadmap to realize our savings. The next thing we did is we also created a governance group and embedded the business architecture dimensions into that. And so what that means is now we have a better way to make decisions when an organization or group is asking for new applications. We ask, okay, what business capability will that serve? Where in the value stream is that going to sit? And what information is that going to produce or consume? And so we now have a way to assess that a little better, and it starts driving again that common language where the business would now come to us before and say, well, before they would come and ask, I want XYZ application. Now they could come and say, well, we want to enhance our business capability in this area, and this is how we're going to do it. So we provided that understanding, and I think that was the biggest takeaway. The application rationalization project was great and had its goals and objectives, but I think the lasting is that we introduced business architecture, and we were able to quickly do it with help from the groups, and then roll it out, and now everybody has that common language. I think that was my last slide. So.
Great, Santana, thanks. If you want to hand it back to me.
Yep, let me hand that back.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'd ask you and Vernon to come off of mute. or stay off of mute for you, Vernon to come off of mute. So just a bit of a commercial before we get to the Q&A, and thank you for everyone who's put questions in. There's some good ones here, and we'll try to address them. But just a little more on Insight EA, right? So we are Fios Insight is a fairly new company. We've got a new robust SaaS enterprise business and information architecture platform. Really, one of our goals is to make EA tools more accessible to the broader EA community. And to that end, we're offering all the AEA members free access to Insight EA for the remainder of 2018. Simply go to our website and sign up for your free trial by the end of September, and we'll give you access to the solution to try for the rest of 2018. If you like what you see, AEA members can get a special individual user license for just $100 a month with no commitment. If you're interested in a 12-month subscription, we'll provide an additional 2 months for free. So if you're interested in this offer or learning more about us, visit fiosinsight.com/AEA. And at this point, I will start to hand out some questions. So Santana, I think we'll go with you first. There's a few here I'll read out to you. So while assessing the business capabilities, what level of the organization did you need to have buy-in from to ensure constructive participation from people in various business functions? And how did the company set the stage for your assessment?
That's a great question. I think I didn't touch upon this, but it is very important to get executive sponsorship for this type of program. So we were able to get our VP level sponsorship from the respective groups. And one of the things that it did help is we had them send out a email to the different groups letting them know that this was coming from them. And so they saw this coming, and they knew, participation is important to this, and, we need to get this right. And, so getting their commitment to ensure that getting that sponsorship, to ensure that we had the commitment from throughout the organization was key to it. So an initiative like this, I would say, needs to be sponsored by the executive group and communicated likewise, and that's how we were able to get the good response rate that we got, and also getting everybody follow-ups scheduled. So when we would send follow-ups to schedule, people would accept those and would come on time, and so that is key. Good question.
Vernon, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to take a slightly different tack on that, because Santana, that was a great answer. I think your answer was more about how the portfolio rationalization was bought in from the organization, but my take on the on the question was that the person asking the question wanted to know what level of buy-in you had for developing the business capability map in the first place. So correct me if I'm wrong there, but that was my understanding of the question. So I'm going to answer that anyway, because I'm sure somebody would like to know that.
Yeah.
So when we set Santana and his company up with Insight EA and got them started, we provided them with an industry reference model, which was a generic BCM for oil and gas. It's one of the number that we have and that we've spent a long time working on. And Santana and his team then went to certain areas of the business where they felt they needed to extend that BCM or clarify it or use specific language that was unique to their company, and then tweak it a little bit, if you like. But the BCM started from an industry reference model. In other cases, other client engagements that we've done, that has not been the case. We've been either in an entirely new industry that we haven't had a reference model for, or it's been a company in an industry that felt they were very different from the standards. And at the end of the day, they often are not. They just use different words to describe the same thing. But generally speaking, you want to have at least somebody from the strategy team involved. You need business leadership in each of the component areas of the organization. And you need we found very effectively, a good business analyst. And there's always a business analyst out there somewhere. You lift a rock up and you'll find somebody who's done it forever and they understand it forever and they know that piece of the industry and that piece of their business inside out. And getting those folks on board and getting them to understand the value of a consistent capability-based approach is absolutely key.
Great, thanks, Vernon. Another question here was, how do you keep the information up to date?
That's a good question. That requires follow-up. So I think we had to set up a schedule to say, okay, for these areas, let's send out a questionnaire maybe in 6 months or a year to see if anything's changed. Another way you keep it up to date is you embed this in the new demand process, and so anytime that you're gonna go and look at a new piece of software, it's going to have impacts to your capabilities, your business architecture, information architecture, and applications, and so you take that time to understand what those impacts are and update it at that point. So those are two approaches. You do have to have that iterative updates, get people to update that, so you can send out questionnaires. But I think that the easiest way that I saw was embed some sort of toll gate in your process for new applications, and you can use that as an opportunity to engage with business or the correct stakeholders to update your current information.
Okay, thanks. I'm just rolling through the questions here. Alan Lilly, I saw a great question from you here. What approach would you suggest to take for a public sector company? And your example says the UK National Health Service. I would say probably the same approach that we took when we did this whole exercise for HMRC, HMCE, Inland Revenue as it used to be, which is it's no different from any other business. We have to treat it like any other business. There's a wealth of materials out there back from the old e-government days that are available as start points. The government-wide standards become very important in any such exercise like that. I'm not familiar with the NHS specifically, but I have worked with some other government departments. But scale is an issue there. I know adoption, we found generally when working with governments both in the UK and in the US, adoption is actually easier than it is in private industry, often because people have less of an axe to grind. They have less of a, this is my area, not our area. So I don't know if that helps at all, but that's my personal take on it.
I'll take a couple easy ones here as the sales guy. So if it's not clear at this point, Santana was using Insight EA, which is the product from Fios Insight. There was a question here about what did you use for surveys and questionnaires. That is an integral part of the solution that we offer. Although it's not part of the free trial. It's not set up as part of the free trial, but there are some videos on our site that can walk you through how surveys work and that sort of thing. There were questions about sharing the slides. Obviously, we're happy to share the slides. I think hopefully we can post them alongside of the recording. Vernon, there are questions here about, have we done anything extra or new specifically with regards to the TOGAF framework? Maybe we should address that.
Not sure what you mean by new there. I mean, we have been, I'm myself and a couple of other folks in the company have been involved with the Open Groups Architecture Forum on and off for many years, so we have input into it the same way that every member has input into it. We are currently going through the TOGAF certification process for Insight EA, so it's something we're working actively with the certification folks to achieve TOGAF certification. We have never intended that the tool would be bound into a single methodology, so I'm not sure what else to say about that really. I mean, we cover BizBot techniques, we cover some BPMN techniques, we cover some TOGAF techniques, like we have building block models, ABBs and SBBs, but it's not intended to be a rigid TOGAF tool. If somebody wanted to have a homepage which shows the ADM and let them drill into which reports and which models are appropriate at each stage of the ADM, then we can do that. I mean, with the most recent release, with 9.2 of TOGAF, there were adjustments to the meta model to support business architecture, but we didn't drive those. We are reacting to those. We're making sure that all of the relationships in that meta model are available within our framework, but our tool is set up so that it has user-definable interrelationships anyway. So out of the box, it's defined to do a number of things, but users can then flexibly change it if they want to. So hopefully that answers that one.
Okay. There were a couple questions, one early on and one just now, about elaborating on the difference between implementation and execution of strategy. This is really this is referring back to the book, Business Architecture, the Missing Link in Strategy Formulation, Implementation, and Execution. You know, it's information from that book. It's not Theos's Insights IP or you know, our methodology per se. What I'll tell you is that the difference is implementation is really about putting everything in place in the organization, the organizational structure, all the systems, and everything around what you need to actually execute on your strategy. So if you think of the implementation as more of that transitional state, with the end state, you know, being the proper execution of the strategy. And I realize that's an iterative process, and you know, there's no real points in time where those things are happening on multiple levels. But I guess I would refer you to the folks who wrote that book, the Asate group, for more information on that. So there's another question here, just came in, and there were a few questions on defining, you know, what an application is. But the question of Santana is, what steps did you use in the initial analysis of understanding all the applications? What were the business capabilities developed first? And there was an earlier question asking again about coming to a common definition of what an application is.
Yeah, so we did have to address what an application is. So we didn't take applications like Adobe Acrobat, which you can have a lot of different versions on. You know, you are paying maintenance and support from an enterprise level for your Adobe in some cases, but we didn't take those type of applications. We chose line of business applications and some platforms. And I think the real way for us to assess where the application was, if it's that line of business, if it has a budget line item, is it a custom application as well? So you do have to define that, and that's going to be up to, you know, what your goals are for, if it's an application rationalization. So what your goals are for that, or if you're going to go down deep into the other, you know, because you could get into, you know, programming languages or, you know, frameworks and stuff like that. So we didn't want to go down to that level. We chose to stay at line of business applications and high dollar applications.
There's a question here, Vernon. Is Insight EA an actual tool that would map out an organization's business model based on data being provided to it?
If that question included the word automatically, then the answer is no. If you mean, can it very easily import information from other sources and be used to graphically model an organization from a capability, information, value stream, process, data, and various other points of view, then absolutely. Great.
There's a question here. I'm not sure the wording is exactly right, but I'll read it, and either of you can answer this. As a business architect, you should be side by side with IT or solution architect when they begin with the implementation of the rationalization. I think it's should you be? Or can you deliver defined artifacts that they should follow up on?
Well, I can take a first crack at that, but in generic terms, and then Santana can tell us specifically what he did at his organization, if you like. So generally, when we've done these sort of engagements, and we've done a number of APRAT, portfolio rationalization engagements, it's the business architecture that leads it. We need to have the capabilities in place. We need to have the definition of the required outcomes in place. We need to have that mapped ideally back to strategy and back to the goals we're trying to achieve. All of that business architecture framework needs to be there before gathering the specific inventories of what you are going to rationalize. And we found that true across a number of different industries and different organizations. We've done this across energy and utility companies, oil companies, banks, various different organizations. And so generally, we will always lead with the business architecture. Now, that doesn't say that the business architect shouldn't continue to be engaged, because certainly something that we found in the last few engagements we've done is that there is valuable input to refining the business capability map, to refining the value streams, to refining the information models that comes out of the rationalization exercise. But obviously, rationalization is only one of the things that we get involved in and that Insight EA can be used for, but it's the one we're talking about today, so that's why we're concentrating on that. Santana, do you want to add anything to that, or does that cover it?
Sure. No, I would say absolutely. If that business architecture already exists, providing those artifacts as a starting point helps. In my case, that did not exist. As I said in my presentation, we had to actually use that starting point that was provided and start educating our business. And the business knows what they do. If you don't have a dedicated business architecture, or maybe it's called something different in your area, if you don't have that already there, then you're going to have to do, as EAs, you're going to have to do some of that business architecture yourself and educating the business on what all these dimensions are, what is a business capability, what is a value stream, what is the information model in your organization, information as well. So all the people that you're asking within the business units know what they do from a business perspective. They've sometimes just never taken the time to document it and put it into a visual, or just even into a list. One of the things that we found is when we put that in there as a starting point, there we got comments like, "This is great. We know what we do, and cross-functionally we understand it, but nobody's ever taken the time to document it and put it down and into a list, or even much less a visual." So, yeah, you need to have that to talk to the business and be successful. But if you have it and you have that practice, it's great. If you're not, you're going to have to get in there and build it yourself.
Yeah, and then business architecture is often a revelation for an organization. And that can be a double-edged sword, because either it can be you see all these connections that you didn't know were there, you can see the way to reach strategic goals that you just didn't have an ability to do before. But the flip side of that is certainly with this work that we were doing with Santana, for example, and the stuff that we've done specifically around APRATs, often you expose some nasty underbellies of old, very, very inward-facing solutions that are quite self-serving, and this lays everything bare. The whole point of this approach is there is nothing at all that is subjective about it. It is completely objective. It measures everything equally. As Santana said, in order to generate those 2x2 graphs, the application value charts with the bubbles on, it's purely a set of metrics that are put in. There's no emotion goes into it. There's no prejudice, no bias goes into it. And it probably wasn't very clear on the slide because it was quite small, but there was a long list down the right-hand side of those bubble charts. We may even have not shown those, actually, I apologize, but there is a long list down the right-hand side of those bubble charts where you can turn on and off various criteria, and then you can look at the portfolio from a lot of different sort of subtle, nuanced ways. If I am looking at a cloud migration strategy, then what would the responses to these business value and technical health questions be, as opposed to I'm looking at closing a data center, which is a different question. So whatever it is you're leading towards, you can shape all of the questions in the questionnaire, and you can shape the measures that are used to plot those apps against each other in all sorts of different ways.
Great, and we've got just a couple minutes left here. The one question here was, can information be exported to a non-proprietary format? Yeah, a lot of the information in our tool is easily imported and exported to and from Excel. We also have an OData connector which makes it very easy not only to pull information out of the system, but also to leverage other reporting tools like Power BI, Tableau, Spotfire, QlikView, any of those other platforms that you might want to use for analytics. Let's end with a high-level question. Well, maybe we have time for two more, but any suggestions on, and Santana, maybe you can take this one. I'm not sure if it was your situations, but any suggestions on how to approach a business architecture initiative when the CIO is project sponsor and the business stakeholder participation is not guaranteed? I'll offer either one of you for that one.
I'll let you go with that, Santana. You are closer to that more recently. I'm away from that world now.
So say that again. My understanding is where the CIO is a project, more of an execution side.
If it's an IT led, I guess if it's an IT led initiative, and you can't count on business stakeholder involvement, is that something that you experienced in your project, Santana? If not,
no, fine. Not that much. I would say if it is not, if you don't have the business buy-in and you don't have a business executive buy-in with and your business groups at the different levels are not forthcoming, introducing business architecture is not going to be as successful, just because you're not going to get all the information maybe, or you're not going to get a lot of feedback on it. So I would say that's key. If you do want to approach it, one of the things that you can do is start with industry models or industry information. Gartner has a lot of it. There's also an organization, APQC, which has different models that you can start with. So if you just need something to start with and then having them refine it, maybe that's a slower approach to say, okay, instead of sitting down and let's just whiteboard everything, tell me everything you do, let me start with a starting point that's 80% of the way there and I'll make it yours. That's one way you can do it. So yeah, it's tough if you don't have that business buy-in.
Thanks, Santana. This is somewhat related, and we'll end with this one, maybe to you, Vernon. Have you ever worked with an organization with no clear definition of capabilities? If you did, would you recommend the use of business functions to help map and identify capabilities?
Oh, now, business functions and capabilities are not the same thing, as I'm sure the authors of every single one of those books I was talking about will tell you. I've worked with a very large organization, also an oil and gas organization as it happens, who wanted to quite separately model business functions and business capabilities and then see the interaction between the two of them. So, yes, it's a start point. The trouble is, at a high level, you can have an organization unit, a function, a capability, and possibly even in some cases a value stream that all have the same name. And it's a nasty situation. I think really going back a stage to education is so important there. Reading the books, reading the literature, taking the business architecture courses to get a common foundation is so important in those cases.
Okay, so we're just about at the bottom, and I probably should have switched to this slide sooner. Apologies. If you have any specific questions for Vernon or Santana, you can see their contact details here. If you have more generic questions about FIOS Insight and Insight EA, feel free to reach out via email to info@fiosinsight.com or myself, Chris Vassalotti, cvassalotti@fiosinsight.com. Great session. Thanks to AEA. Thank you all for really great questions. We will try and get these extracted and answered, all of them. I know we didn't get to all of them, and posted. Hopefully, Brigitte, we can get these posted with the webinar as well as the PowerPoint. So.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Vernon. Thank you, Santana. We will upload this webinar and the slides within the next 24 hours, and we will also be sending out those questions along with a follow-up email to all attendees today. And the questions, we will also post those to the AEA website as well. So thank you all for a great session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Everybody get back out there. Bye.